Chapter 14. Dad's eyes glared, and his voice shook with anger. Get home now. I swallowed, and my heart caught in my throat. I stared into his eyes. They were bloodshot and wild. I know everything. His hand trembled with fury around the flagpole. The crowd of heroes stood around me in stunned silence. I'm not sure they recognized him yet. I found the pictures. Out of all the times I'd seen him fly into a rage, I'd never seen him this angry. It scared me more than when I was a kid and he'd grabbed the thick black leather belt, snapped it loud to instill fear. My mouth was open, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say to make this better. I looked around and saw my team gathered nearby. Uberman looked on with curiosity and then stepped in. Excuse me, sir. Why don't we escort you both to our reception area where we can talk this out? He put a calming hand on my dad's shoulder. Dad's head whipped around and he pushed Uberman away, the way a drunk in a bar would start a fight with someone who didn't see it coming. I heard a few gasps in the crowd. Warrior Woman was on us in a flash, Silver Bullet and the Spectrum close behind. I don't know how you got in here, but this is a private function. You are not welcome. Warrior Woman turned my father around by the shoulders, ready to kick him out. I saw the three heroes' faces drop and their eyes widen as they recognized my father, years older and still wearing the factory uniform from his shift. A tiny word of recognition escaped Silver Bullet's lips. Hal? Dad spoke to Warrior Woman through clenched teeth. Get your hands off of me and give me back my son. He swung her arm off his shoulder by her golden bracelet. If she hadn't been a demi-immortal, he would have dislocated her shoulder. His stare was still fixed squarely on me. We'll talk about this at home. I looked around, mortified. A wave of whispers spread through the crowd, and I saw Golden Boy explaining to Miss Scarlet exactly who this middle-aged man in front of them was. I saw Scarlet mouth, "No shit." Ruth looked back from the crowd, her face lowered, and I'd wondered if she'd seen this coming, and if she had, why hadn't she warned me? I stared at her for a few moments, hoping to make eye contact, but she never looked up. Dad, hold on, let me explain. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I had to try something. I'd worked too hard to lose everything now. Uberman was piecing together who Dad was. I suddenly understood the lure of my mother's power. All I wanted to do was disappear. Dad grabbed me roughly by the bicep and started to drag me toward the door. I knew my arm would be badly bruised tomorrow, but I was numb to the pain. All eyes were on me, and I wanted time to stop so I could run away. I was humiliated, disciplined like a little boy in front of the entire league and all its tryout squads. He yanked me so hard that I stumbled over my feet and fell toward the ground, but he kept his grip on my arm so I didn't hit the floor. I skid along the ground as Dad pulled me toward the exit. I wanted to yell for him to stop, that he was hurting me. Hal. Everyone looked up to see Justice lower himself from the sky and hover over the ground in between us and the exit. Let us go someplace that we can talk about this privately. Justice glanced at me with a look of sympathy. Please. My father's jaw clenched with rage. He shook ever so slightly, and I thought he might explode. How dare you tell me what to do with my son? Tiny lines of spit flew from Dad's mouth at Justice. You. Dad, please. I begged him to stop. Tom, you shouldn't have lied to your father, but that was your choice. Justice remained calm. He held his finger up like a teacher cautioning a hyper child to take a time out. Hal, think about what you're doing. Think about your son for a minute. Justice actually landed his 2 feet on the ground in front of my father. He placed his hands on his shoulders. I couldn't tell what he was doing, if he was maybe using his powers to quell Dad's rage. Listen to me, Hal. He's good. He's got a lot of potential. I watched my dad listen with his best poker face, totally still. Maybe Justice was getting through. He could really be something, Hal. I watched Dad and tried to figure out what he was thinking. If he could be turning a corner in his brain, maybe he was beginning to believe there was a place for his son on the very team he so hated. And then the unthinkable happened. Dad slugged Justice, square in the jaw, an old-fashioned right hook, something straight out of the boxing ring. The force of the blow knocked Justice over, and he stumbled backward. The entire crowd gasped. I couldn't turn around, but I heard the commotion of murmurs behind me. Justice looked at Dad from the ground and rubbed his chin. All of us knew a mere punch couldn't harm him physically, but still, no one had ever seen him take a sucker punch straight to the face like that. It was a shock to everyone, and silence filled the room as people waited to see what he would do next. Dad stood over him, fury in his eyes, his feet poised to move, his arm held up like vipers ready to strike. Justice slowly moved to get up, and then I grabbed Dad's arm. "Stop it, Dad!" I knew better than to touch Dad when he was in one of his combat rages. The minute I grabbed his arm, I triggered his natural defense, a reaction as instinctive as his desire to protect me. He whipped around and grabbed me by the collar and pinned me against the wall with his fist raised. I saw his nostrils flare and a network of blood vessels bulge out from his forehead, seething red. I closed my eyes and held my arms up in defense. Not that they would have done much against a crushing blow from him. I waited for the impact, but it didn't come. When I finally gathered the courage to open my eyes, I looked through my fingers and saw my dad. His paternal instinct had won out, just barely. His chest heaved with effort as he tried to breathe himself into submission. I looked in his eyes, and instead of rage, I saw fear. Then I scanned each and every face in the crowd, from Golden Boy to the Galaxy Twins to Warrior Woman to Uberman to Justice to Ruth, a guilty and pained expression on her face, to every last person who thought they could one day live up to the title of hero. I felt their collective look bear down upon my father. That look reminded me of the way he'd stared at me after that basketball game where we all pretended not to hear that kid who called me the gay guy. Although their reaction varied slightly according to personality, there was one common denominator. They all looked at my father with contempt. He relaxed his fighting pose and tried to hold his head high. He looked at me and slowly reached out his hand. "Let's go, Tom," he said softly. I ran out of the room and didn't look back. It had started to rain, so I hitchhiked home. It was the first and only time I'd ever done anything that stupid. The old guy in the car seemed nice enough and tried to strike up a conversation, but I just watched the windshield wipers go back and forth as they squeaked against the glass. If I opened my mouth to say anything, I was afraid I would cry or scream out in frustration. He let me out by the highway exit near our neighborhood. I walked the rest of the way in the rain, and I couldn't tell if it was warm or cold outside. I pushed open the front door and ran upstairs 2 at a time and stopped in the hallway. I looked at the trail of pictures that led from my room to his. I reached down and carefully picked up each picture, tears streaming from my eyes. He'd ripped a few, crumpled some others, but I vowed to straighten them and tape them up and fix them later. They were scattered all over his bedroom. He must have thrown them at the wall in his rage. I reached under his bed and found some more. One had even made its way all the way under the closet door. I opened the closet to get a photo and picked it up. It was the shot of my mother at her graduation from teacher's college. Although Dad had torn it in two, you could still see Mom. She looked up at me with a sly grin on her face, like we both now knew what she was smiling about. I looked up and saw Dad's old costume hanging up in front of me in its fresh dry cleaning bag. Seconds later, I darted downstairs to the refrigerator and grabbed a pan of leftover lasagna and 2 jars of tomato sauce. I took the stairs 4 at a time as I raced back up to his bedroom. I ripped the flimsy plastic off his old costume and yanked it out by the hanger and threw it on the floor. I opened a jar of tomato sauce and slung it at the jacket. Red sauce splayed across the lapels as if a sword had sliced through the front, and blood and gook had gushed out of the wound. I threw the other jar at the costume lengthwise, all the way down one of his pant legs. Then I dumped the old lasagna on the outfit and I jumped on top of it to smash it in. When I felt like I'd ground in as much as I could, I hawked all the phlegm I could gather in my throat and spit on it. I stepped off the old costume, pulled back, and felt my heart pounding in my chest. My mind flashed to the image of my father standing over me, his fist raised to strike, his breast heaving as he struggled to control his anger. I didn't want to be like him that way. I looked at the mess, took a few deep breaths, and carefully put the ruined suit back inside the cheap plastic hanger and hung it in the closet.